God sanctifies time. We can't do that. The reason the seventh day is blessed and set apart is precisely because it is the day God stopped his creative work. He rested. The Genesis pattern, so-called, is this. Work is completed, God ceases, then holiness is declared. In this congregation, we're quite fortunate to have a wealth of scriptural wisdom within the elders and the laity as well. The elders care about this church, and they do a great many things behind the scenes to ensure the Sabbath day experience is a pleasant one and an edifying one for everyone here. Now, no doubt you all have established the boundaries of your Sabbath day activities as per the fourth commandment. We're not militant about personal preferences here. We strive to be kind and respectful to everybody, and I find that quite encouraging. I asked my Hebrew instructor about the more traditional Jewish view of the Sabbath day, the do's and the don'ts. And I have compiled a list of the do's and the don'ts, the absolute list. You can't argue with this list. Certainly, I'm not going there. I know better than to go there. He said something we've all heard before, and it's as sound a logic as I have heard on any teaching with respect to this matter. And it is, any work that was required for the building of the first temple, that work would have been halted on the Sabbath. And there most certainly would have been a lot of tangential work that goes along with that. There would have been administrative services, support services, engineering, procuring materials, keeping the tools, sharpening the tools. There would have been a lot of things that went into that. So you get the notion that work ceases. We just have to stop that work. A lot of folks are engaged in work nowadays that's more cerebral. Some of it's medical. Some of it is electronic. So you wonder, are there exceptions owing to modern technology and lifestyles? I would say probably not, but I would expect most of us here would answer that by saying, let the Holy Spirit be your guide and remain faithful. Now, the question comes up in my mind when I ask myself, does time matter if it is not infused with holiness? And I guess that would depend on your definition of matter, what is important about the thing. God showed the Hebrews, captive in Egypt at the time, that Pharaoh was not their master. Their slavery was but an illusion that God shattered in a meaningful way. He did not just break their bonds. He established his power, his strength, and his authority in a meaningful and memorable way that rings down true through time, even unto today. Now, that is the thing that matters. Oftentimes, I think we feel a bit victimized by the constraints of time, either in our busy daily schedules or in the lack of it to truly give God our fullest measure of devotion, or in some cases, nearing our own end. Time can be a scary thought. It ought not to be, at least not for God's people. God created time, and he is master of it, just as he is our master. He created us with an innate need to make our time here on earth meaningful. We do not control time, but we can choose how to best utilize it for God's glory. All of you give some of your time to lend a hand or provide support to others in need of a bit of encouragement and comfort. You ease burdens and you pick up the slack when our brothers and sisters become weary. And boy, do we get weary sometimes. There's no lack of things to wear us down and deplete our energy and attempt to draw us away from our focus on God. When the Sabbath day rolls around, we just naturally pause the grief. We pause the worry, pause the incessant mental dialogue, that dialogue we have with the accuser. And we come here and refresh ourselves with a bit of scripture reading, messages presented by the elders and others in this church, fellowship afterwards, which is always really refreshing. And we do all of it offering glory unto God. Now, the New Moon Festival of Rosh Chodesh is one such in the regular life of the Hebrews after they were lifted up out of bondage in Egypt. It's a minor holiday. It's observed at the beginning of the months of the Hebrew calendar. In the book of Exodus, we see that God establishes this new month of Nisan, it was called. We call it spring. It's actually the vernal equinox. It's also known by its original name as Aviv, as the beginning of the Hebrew calendar. Quoting now, "And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be the beginning of months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you." That's Exodus 12, 1 and 2. You're all very familiar with that. This act, this sanctification of the new moon, is a fundamental teaching that is at the base of the establishment of the Hebrew calendar, which is just a marking of time. And it's the first command God gave to the children of Israel collectively. You might also observe that it comes at the beginning of the establishment of the Passover regulations and observations, and that little matter of removing all the nation of Israel out of the bondage of Egypt. Now, that's easy enough for God to do, but that's no simple thing in our minds. You see that this establishment of a holy time is significant enough in God's plan for teaching his people, the nation of Israel, his various ways, that he speaks it into existence at what might seem to us an inconvenient time. There was a lot going on at that moment. There's no such thing for God, no such thing as an inconvenient time. Nothing is inconvenient for him. In Numbers 10:10, we read that Moses receives a command from God, quoting now, "Also at your times of rejoicing, your appointed feasts and new moon festivals, you shall sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and your fellowship offerings, and they will be a memorial for you before your God. I am the Lord, your God." End quote. The observance of God's holy days imprints upon us the very definition of infusing our time with holiness to make it meaningful and memorable. The meaning of time is best exemplified in the observance of the holy Sabbath day of rest. We do it often. We do it every week. In the creation story, we see man and land animals are created on the sixth day. And immediately thereafter, man enters into the first Sabbath day of rest. But what if the nature of that day is also the very nature of time and not rest, or at least not rest as we know it? In Genesis 2:1, "Thus the heaven and the earth were completed in all their vast array." End quote. Creation is complete. Everything is in order. There exists no chaos. Our God, the one true God of creation, is a God of order, not chaos. In Genesis 2:2, "By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." End quote. But not owing to weariness, and not owing to rest as we understand it. The numbering of the days of creation from one day, as the first day is labeled in my Hebrew language Bible, to second day, third day, fourth day, and fifth day. It's not insignificant. However, the next day is labeled the sixth day. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. The day of man's creation and the creation of land animals happening on the same day is labeled with the definite article the. The seventh day is labeled likewise. We can see God has marked these 2 days as important in a way the others are not. God sanctifies time. We can't do that. We glorify him for that sanctification on the Sabbath day of rest, the day of cessation. Going back to Genesis 2, now we're in verse 3. Next we read, and I'll pick it up at the end, "And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested from all his work, end quote. Melekato in the Hebrew. The noun melekah refers to purposeful work, that is to say, skilled work, precise craftsmanship. It in no way refers to exhausting labor or servitude or menial chores. It describes intentionality and attention to detail, the work of a master craftsman. Some of you men are masters of your trade, and you know well the meaning of that word, craftsman, melekah. The verse is saying, quoting now, God completed his melekato, his work which he had done, end quote. It is complete. He stops, and that is noteworthy. Then comes the most hotly contested word in this passage, and he rested. There's that word, rested, or Shabbat. It comes from the root word Shabbat, which means to cease, to stop, to desist. Now, as you folks who bake know, and I'm one of you, after bringing together the water, the flour, the salt, and the yeast, you have a dough, and you work it to a certain extent. And when you're done working it, you set it aside to rest. The yeast continues to do the work. You and I can't manufacture yeast. That comes from God. It's native in the environment. It's all around us. And it does the work after we've set it aside to rest. It does not mean to recover from fatigue, as God does not get tired. Shabbat is about stopping the labor of the first 6 days of the week because the work is finished. After 6 days of purposeful work, melekatah, God ceases. He stops creating. The stopping itself marks the work as complete. Now we're still in Genesis 2:2. We see that the verse repeats itself twice. On the seventh day appears twice. His work which he had done appears twice. Now, in the Hebrew language, this sort of repetition alerts us to something of significance, something to be mindful of, something that matters. The text is clear that completion and cessation are the emphasis of this verse. Verse 2 tells us that God completes his work and then deliberately and with emphasis stops. Now, in verse 3, time becomes holy. Quoting now, then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because in it he ceased from all his work which God had created and made, end quote. For the first time in the narrative, God blessed something that is not a living creature. He blesses a day, the seventh day. And then we hear Vayikadesh, and he made it holy. This comes from the root kadesh, which means to set apart, to make distinct, to designate as something special. It is also about separation. Holiness here is not about morality or ritual. The text does not indicate anything more is required other than the cessation of work. It is about separation. God does not sanctify any of the creation up to this point, up to the Sabbath day. He sanctifies time. The seventh day is set apart from the other days. The text leaves no room for ambiguity there at all. The reason the seventh day is blessed and set apart is precisely because it is the day God stopped his creative work. He rested because on it he ceased. The holiness of the day is owing to the act of cessation. Now, I understand this is a bit of a different understanding here, and it took me a little while to come to this just based on the text that I'm reading. And I understand that you might have some questions about that or some comments, and I welcome all of those. At the end of the verse, we see God had created and made. Both are verbs. Everything he brought into existence and crafted with purpose and precision and intentionality now stands complete. Created and made are words to indicate the work is done. Now you notice there is no reference to, and I'm quoting here, and there was evening and morning the seventh day, as there is with the other days of creation. The text does not make clear the reason, but the absence is deliberate and noteworthy. Day 7 stands apart structurally and conceptually. So what makes day 7 different? Well, for one thing, no new creation happens on that day. The work is complete. The day itself is blessed. The day itself is made holy. At the cessation of work, of creation, the stopping is what declares the work complete. The first full day of man's existence, day 7, he steps immediately into a day already blessed, already sanctified, owing to the cessation of the work of creation. A day already marked holy and complete. Newly formed man can simply walk into the day and know that it is finished and it is complete. Holiness does not flow from our efforts. It flows from God's completed work. That is to say, the work of his hand. The first day of man's life was not a day of laboring or producing or toiling or worrying. It was a day of receiving that which God had already finished. It's a foundational pattern. Now, you probably would like to have some examples. Let me give you 2. In Exodus 26, God gave Moses instructions for building the tabernacle. Skilled craftsmen are called together. Materials are procured. The work is melakah, purposeful, intentional craftsmanship. After God gives these instructions, he says in Exodus chapter 31, verse 13, "Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and thee throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you." Verse 14, "You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you." End quote. Why would God do that here? The tabernacle of God is a model of creation, a microcosm, if you will. Just as in the creation narrative, the tabernacle involves work, then a cessation of work. Exodus chapter 39, verse 32. "Thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished." End quote. Exodus chapter 39, verse 43. "Then Moses looked over the work, and indeed they had done it, as the Lord had commanded. Just so they had done it. And Moses blessed them." End quote. The work was complete, and they ceased from their work. Exodus chapter 40, verses 33 and 34 show the glory of the Lord filling the tabernacle, but only after the work has been pronounced finished. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 38, we see the house is finished after many years of precise work, all of the details attended to with skill, and all of it according to plans and specifications. 1 Kings 8, 10, and 11, and I'm quoting, "And it came to pass, when the priests came out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." End quote. 1 Kings 6:38, the work is completed. 1 Kings 8, 10, and 11, God's glory fills it. 1 Kings 8, 54 through 61, Solomon blesses the workers. The pattern holds. Now, how do we connect that to us, to the believers? In Hebrews chapter 4, that's what connects Genesis to believers. Verses 3 and 4. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. "For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, so I swore in my wrath they shall not enter my rest. Although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. For he has spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this place they shall not enter my rest." Going now to verse 10, "For he who has entered into his rest has himself also ceased from his works, as God did from his." End quote. Rest is not human effort. It is ceasing from your works and trusting in God's finished work. The Israelites, you will know, failed to enter that rest, not because they did not work hard, but because they did not trust God's sufficiency. As we read in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 16, quoting now, "For who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey?" So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. End quote. Consider Psalm 95, verse 8. "Do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, as in the day of trial in the wilderness. Verse 9, when your fathers tested me, they tried me, though they saw my work. Verse 10, for 40 years I was grieved with that generation and said, it is a people who go astray in their hearts and they do not know my ways. Verse 11, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. End quote. The rest is made ready and complete. We just have to enter into it. That is the creation narrative. Believers enter rest by trusting God's finished work. Completion comes from holiness, not after human striving. Sabbath is about stepping into what God has already made whole and saying, this is enough. Nothing needs to be added. Entering God's rest is an act of faith. You don't finish it, you receive it. Where are we still striving to make holy that which God has already set apart? Where are we working to complete what God has already finished? The tabernacle required highly skilled work. The temple required many years of dedicated effort. But once the work was complete, the workers ceased. And then God's presence filled the space. Understanding the Sabbath as a day of cessation and not necessarily of exhaustion changes how we think about rest and our role entering into it. Sabbath rest is not about collapsing from exhaustion. It is about intentionally stopping to recognize that what has been made is enough and offer glory unto God. The doctrine of enough is worth defining for yourself as it declares you are satisfied with whatever God has brought to you. Now, we all strive for more and better, newer, and unique, but you have to ask yourself, to what end? It's not always a terribly satisfying end, but we do it nonetheless. God's provision is sufficient. We have all that we need. This wonderful hall is a very good example of that. The creation pattern becomes the foundation for the Sabbath command, but in Genesis, it is simply part of how the world is structured. It's built into the fabric of creation. It is one of the reasons we are drawn to the Sabbath, observed on the Sabbath, the seventh day, as our time to cease our daily work, our efforts. Even if we were not raised with the seventh day Sabbath as our teaching or learned it in our youth or it was handed down to us from our parents, we're still drawn to the rightness of it organically. So we have to ask ourselves, if God chose to cease his work to mark it as complete, is there something in my productive or creative life that I need to stop? Not owing to tiredness or exhaustion, but simply because it is time to acknowledge that it is complete. The Genesis pattern, so-called, is this. Work is completed, God ceases, then holiness is declared. It's never the other way around. It is a pattern unmistakable in Scripture. From Genesis through the tabernacle, into Solomon's temple, and then connected into Hebrews, we can see a similar pattern. As stated, Shabbat means to cease, to rest. This is foundational to our understanding of how God works and how we are to respond. This is not about rest as relaxation, although it does provide that. It's more about cessation. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 28 reminds us, God does not grow tired or weary. He does not stop because he is exhausted. He doesn't get exhausted. He stops because the work is finished. Vayakal. He ceases. Vaya Sheftah. He blesses the day. Vaya Varak. The day is made holy. Vaya Kadesh. Have a blessed Sabbath.